Do authors get the job done? Let's talk about it. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Rob. That's my mom, Karen. There she is. It's always backwards. And this is Books, Banter, and Beyond. So today we're going to try a new little format. We're going to call it the book bag. And this is going to cover a few little questions that we ask, all kind of still themed around one topic. But we're just going to throw it out there, see how it works, see if you like it. And today our theme is, do authors get the job done? You're probably thinking that's a very subjective question. What the hell? But, there's still a good ways of going. So we have two ideas to go over here today, right? The first one is about character-driven plots. And the second is, do authors actually meet their goals? So character-driven plots, pretty self-explanatory. It's a book that focuses directly on the individual or individuals. What makes us different than other stories is that these books solely focus on the psyche, human nature, all sorts of things about the person. Why are these popular? Well, sometimes people tend to prefer to watch the show from the point of view of the people, right? I guess an example, to me at least, would be maybe The Lord of the Rings, because you're following the characters through the adventures, right? I guess Star Wars books work because you're following them through. Not to say that they're not generally overall stories, but there's a lot of focus on the characters. So yeah, exactly. So I wanted to get your opinion really quick on it. So if you were to pick, I know detective stories are your favorite. In those stories, you do follow the detective, you follow the suspects. Does that make it better, worse?
Actually, I think in a detective story, yeah, you do follow the detective, but it is more about the story. It is not so much about unless you're doing like a Kinsey, the detective, her name was Kinsey, the woman, and it was the outfit. And it was as much about the story as it was about her life. But generally, I would think, is that as an example, it's more about the actual event that's being investigated.
Okay, that's a fair statement. And actually, as I was asking, I was like, yeah, I think you're right. There's more story than
Yeah, and maybe that's why I like it. But I also like character-driven stories because I want to do a deep dive, and I'm always curious to does my thought about that character kind of meld with what the author is putting out there?
I mean, I don't mind it. I think, depending on the mood. Right now I'm reading a really funny mashup. It's a Sherlock Holmes and H.P. Lovecraft mystery where basically Holmes has to battle Cthulhu. It's hilarious, but it's more of a fantasy world type of deal. And I like it because there's a lot of weird stuff like there. I actually don't necessarily like following Holmes in the story because he kind of gets a little stale asking the same question as what's going on. But I get it though. I mean, you need to have a good cast, but I don't know. It's a very hard one to decide if I like better or not because I think I want a story that's more focused on the action than the individual. Because unless I really get into that person, I can care less about them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And I think that's why you like the horror. I like detective stories because it's more about the story. It's more about how it happened, why it happened, who discovered what, and all. I mean, that to me is exciting. It keeps me engaged, especially since most of the books I read are personal development books, and there is no. I mean, the subject is me, and right, right.
You are the character of the book, right?
Right.
So what do you think? I mean, so I know we've talked about psychology and stuff, whatever. Is it is important to like the character? Do you think the author goes out of their way to be like, okay, everybody's got to love my main character, or do you think that they also want you to hate them sometimes, depending on the story? What do you?
Well, I mean, and are we talking about a one-off book where they do the book?
That is true. Okay, yeah.
Or a series of books where Daniel Silva, as an example, he's from the character is from the Mossad in Israel,
Okay.
and they follow him. I mean, there must be like 25 books, and they literally follow him, and we know who he is, we know what he's about, but it's about the story and how does it tie in. And for me, it is so much more about the story, because ultimately that I'm going to either, I don't care if I like the character or not. If I like the story, I'm going to stick.
Right. Okay. That,
What
and that,
about you? What about you?
because there's so many books from the 90s that do that, but there's also a lot, like for instance Crichton comes to mind, Jurassic Park Lost World. Being a doctor himself, he also, I think he wrote ER as well.
Right.
He focused more on the world. He really didn't necessarily want you to care about who was in the world. He wanted you to see the world, which is why Jurassic Park works so well. I forgot what his name is, the lawyer, the guy who did Lincoln Lawyer and all that stuff.
Yeah. The Firm. He has to do the
Firm,
Firm.
yeah. And he was a lawyer in real life as well, and
Yeah.
he wanted you to see the eyes through the world of what it was to be
Correct.
the attorney, the lawyer, right?
Correct.
So I think it shifted a bit. I feel like in the 90s, a lot of people wrote the world. Now, people are focused on the individual, I think. And I think maybe it's the times, I don't know. But I think you had a question for me on this one about character-driven, right?
I think I do. So, Rob, here's the question. How do character-driven plots contribute to the evolution of empathy in storytelling?
Ah, the word we love to hate. I know, right? Personally, empathy. I think I kind of started already talking about that a little bit. I get how the author wants you to feel, and just kind of like how you said in the Silva books, you could care less about the dude, you just wanted the story. But I think part of their purpose, so to speak, is to get you to feel something. It may not be positive, it may not be negative, it could just be neutral. But I think the more that the author focuses solely on the one person or the two or three people, you're forced into the empathy, I think, because all you're focused on is that person. Even if you don't want to care about the person, because the writer writes so much about them, you can't not feel something, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, and if the characters are not making you feel something, then my guess is we're probably not going to continue to read that particular author if he's not.
Yeah, and I mean, I've told lots of people, and whether it's character driven or not, if I'm 10 pages in or a chapter in and I read the whole thing and I go, this is horrible, I'm going to switch out the book and find something else. It's no offense to the person who wrote it, but if you can't hold me from the first few pages,
Right.
I don't think I want to continue, especially if you have a series of like 30 books. I'm definitely not going to keep going if the first chapter of book, you know what I mean?
So I have a question for you, and
Okay.
this is actually off the beaten path a little bit, going back to somebody like a Daniel Silva who has a gazillion books. When you have an author that has written a gazillion books, do you look at it and say, I have to start at book one and work my way through all books?
It's actually funny you say that, because the one guy, and this guy's amazing, don't get me wrong, but James Patterson, the guy just needs to stop. He's great, don't get me wrong, he's a good author, but the dude just wrote what, like 95% of the books in the world. It's not so much that I necessarily have to always go back to book one, depending on the series. If it's a series like a fantasy or sci-fi that I kind of need the intro, I will. But if it's a series like Silva or Patterson, where it's kind of an individual book each time, I'll pick up the one that I think will hold me. If I decide to go backwards, and because I liked it so much, sure. But I think in terms of somebody who has a whole series, it's not so important to read it in order or the timeline. I have to see if I can functionally go through it first.
And at least keep track. I mean, what happens
Exactly.
here is that, we're fortunate we have a little library here that we can go to, and invariably we'll be attracted to a particular title only to realize it's the same title we keep getting attracted to from that series of books. We check it out.
Right.
We realize, we open it up. Oh my goodness, I already read this. We take it back. So, even from the perspective of, you've started at the beginning, at least you know what number you're on when you get to the end. Which is just an aside. I don't know if you've ever had that thing, where you've been reading a whole series of books and you're out of order and you go, oh, that looks good. And you realize, well, it looks good because you already read it, right?
I've definitely gone through my app and I've gone, oh, let's cool, let's read this, and I read it, and before I check it out, I go, oh, wait a minute, I think I just finished this last week. Okay, next one, and then you get frustrated because you're just like, oh, that was a great book, and then you can't find another one like it. That I think is the bigger problem for me, is that I read the books that I like, and then it's very hard to find an author or a book that matches to that
Right.
ability. And it's not to say, again, I want to reiterate, it's not to say these people are bad writers. It's just, it's a personal opinion. I can read 5 mystery authors and hate 30 of them,
Right.
only because those 30 are not like the 5 that I enjoy reading.
Right.
Those guys are great,
Right.
but I prefer the guys there, and it makes it easier to pick generally, but it also does make it frustrating when you've read all the books and you're like, what do I do now?
Well, funny you should say that, Rob. Some of the platforms are actually doing that because of AI, are able to go through books that are similar to what you like. Spotify has a function now on their platform that
Yeah.
if you have a book and you like it, it literally has a little tab that says more like this. And so the AI is working to send you some books that maybe you wouldn't even have thought of. So that's one of the positives of artificial intelligence, right? So let's talk about writers, right? Let's talk about specifically the writing process.
Right. So the other question that we brought up is, do they reach their goals? And again, my answer to you, you're going to be like, I could have told you that. But really, it's a combination of their discipline, their dedication, and creative vision. What are those 3 to them? It's going to differ, right? As long though as they set the reasoning they're doing this, they've got their goal. Now, I've talked to people, and there's a few things about it. So let's say you're Patterson or somebody like that. You have a certain time frame you have to get the books out, right? So your publisher says, I need you to make me 3 more. So obviously the first goal he's going to have is to make sure he writes 3 to get to his publisher's deadline. So that's the first one. That's a pretty obvious one, right? That's just a business thing,
Right.
whatever. Secondarily, being that they're already popular, you probably want to keep being popular. So you want to give your people a good book, right? And then third, I think, is the subjective part. Is it good? There's no answer to that. There's no specific reason behind it. Is it good because you're Patterson or Stephen King? Maybe. Is it bad because you're Patterson or Stephen King? Just as likely. So I think the objective to the goal is bypassing the business part of getting your book out. It's, how do I keep the people coming back? And it's kind of like you've told me about this via business wise, is how do you keep the customer returning?
Mm-hmm.
That I think is the objective. And I think as long as they can sell, and it kind of sounds a little bit of a sellout because, coming from me, I do appreciate creativity, which is why I do get very hard on some authors who just write and make horrible.
We call it formulaically.
Exactly. They just write and make really bad books, but they do it because they have to get a paycheck, and they have to do their thing. Again, just personal opinion. I'm not saying it's fact, but there's a difference between an objective of an author that is doing this because they have to, or the writers that can still do it for the creative genius. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Brandon Sanderson. He does basically what you would call steampunk meets fantasy meets sci-fi. Okay. He's able to make a fantasy world with lasers, basically.
Okay.
A few people have told me that some of his books are great, and then recently he tried to write one in a different format, and it got panned. Everybody hated it. They still love him. He's still, like, if you say his name, people bow to him. He's a great guy, but he made a horrible book. So
he changed the formula. He changed his formula. You said
he changed his formula, right? So did he make his objective? In this case, no. But he still kept his objective of being a popular author.
And trying something new. And so it's interesting. I've never heard what you're saying, how you're saying it. So, and when I hear that, I hear, okay, he tried something new because he doesn't want to be stagnant and doing the same thing. He's trying something new. fully aware it may not fly, right? I don't think anyone goes in thinking that they're going to like it the same way, but they assume that it's going to kind of be
They hope that someone's going to at least buy 1 or 2 copies of their book.
right.
Yes.
And the fact, as you're saying, is that it didn't fly. It didn't fly, but his popularity didn't go away. Now, I would guess, Rob, that if he kept trying new things and kept putting different things out and not staying with what he already knows his audience wants, or she knows what her audience wants, I don't think he'll get away with that for very long.
Right. And then on the flip side of it, there's an author who has yet to finish their series and probably never will. And that's annoying a lot of people, not to the point of hating the person, but they really want this person to do it. And unfortunately, the person has tweeted and stuff saying, I just, there's no juices going through to finish the thing. And what they don't want to do is put out a bad book. So they become so, let's say, OCD that they don't want to, they want to make sure that it's perfect and or do nothing, which is also not a good thing.
Right.
Either way. So I mean, there's 2 parts to the goal. There's the business part of you have to write a book because that's part of your contract. But the other part of it is, are you doing it for popularity? Are you doing it because you want to write well? Or are you doing it because it's just your favorite hobby to do? Like, and it could be any of those. There's no one reason.
Or all of them.
Or all them, or maybe none of them. Maybe
Right.
it's a different.
You're talking about different writing goals, okay? So when we
Right.
talk about different writing goals, do they impact the creative process then? If you have
Oh, for sure. I mean,
a goal, it impacts your process.
for sure. And I mean, I think it depends on the person too. I mean, unfortunately, in today's age, if an author or somebody says something, it'll ruin them as a person. It may not ruin them as an author, but
Right.
it does change your viewpoint. So you may not want to read that person anymore because they said something out loud that was inappropriate, let's say.
Right.
But as far as their goals, it seems to be that writing is kind of untouchable. You can be a not so hot person, but if you write well, people will read it. And I think that that's the emphasis on why books are such a big deal, because I'm sure I've read people, like for instance, Lovecraft. He was not a nice man. Now, granted, he lived in a time where the rules were different and there was a lot more phobias and a lot of people, whatever. He was not a nice guy, but he is still one of the biggest and most famous horror authors ever. Why? Because he wrote extremely well. And people will bypass that. Now, whether or not it's good to bypass is a different topic, but he writes extremely well and people love him. Now, funny enough, his character, the Cthulhu character, is now public domain. So people have actually now written their own video games and their own short stories and their own movies using the character only because he did what he did. If that creature wasn't so popular, nobody would care, right? So I think it comes down to the writing. If you're just talking writing here, which we are, as long as the person or did or does the writing, they've accomplished their goal. They've written something. It's really up to you or I or the viewers to then say good, bad, indifferent, whatever. The author really doesn't care at that point too much. They've written their book. They put it out to the public.
Right.
Like you said, they hope for the best.
Right.
And not the worst. So, yeah, it's a hard question to answer, right? But I did that on purpose because this is a question that is ongoing.
Right. Right, absolutely. Well, we've been talking about the book bag and specifically the writers in this, but I'm going to put up the screen right now, Rob, because we have the bookstore, right? The Next Chapter Bookstore.shop. When you go there, you're going to be able to find paperbacks and hardbound books and comic books. You'll also find a link to the merchandise store. But if you don't even want to wait, you can go ahead and scan this right now, and it will take you directly to whichever store you want to go to. You may or may not have noticed that Rob and I are wearing our T-shirts, which are really cool. They come in all different colors, so pick the one that you like best.
Very comfortable. I love them.
Yeah, it's very soft. And you know what? I would love to see pictures of people wearing these shirts. Send them in. We'd love to see them. All right. I mean, we're gonna be here next week, right?
We have more next week, but yeah, I mean, I hope you like the style we're doing. I hope the viewers liked it. But yeah, there's just so many questions to ask and not enough answers to give. So
That is true. So join us next week so we can give the answers and that there are not enough of to give. We'll see you next week, everyone. Bye.